we don't have to be craven and succumb. We don't have to agree to everything that the Americans want or what Donald Trump wants.
The thoughts of two big brains, two thoughtful people on the news of the day.
And this morning, it's Baroness Morgan, Nicky Morgan to us, former Conservative Education Secretary. Good morning, Nicky.
Good morning, both.
Good morning. And Sunday Times columnist and former New Statesman editor Jason Cowley. Good morning, Jason.
Yeah, good morning.
Thanks for joining the crew.
Yeah, morning to you
Okay.
both. Good to have you with us. So we're going to be discussing, does Britain have to just accept that maybe the new world reality of Trump's tariffs, they ain't going to change? Need to stop worrying about a US trade deal and just start looking elsewhere for good deals? Also, is the heat coming out of the trans debate? And is it really better to be a woman than ever before? Jason, I'm looking forward to your answer on that.
He's had some time to think about it. You can, of course, join the conversation by WhatsApping us on 0333 003 2353. You can text us on 87222 and start your message with the word Times, and you can email us studio@times.radio.
Now, on the front page of The Times today, it says that President Trump has warned that substantial tariffs are going to remain on imports. We know that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is heading over to Washington. She's going to, of course, be trying to get this bespoke trade deal that actually members of the Trump administration have said, it's not that far away. I just wonder, Nicky, if there might be a bespoke trade deal, but tariffs are probably going to stay, judging by what we're hearing from the Trump administration. Do we just have to accept that now?
Well, I think we have to live with it probably for some time to come. And of course, not just the UK, but it's many countries around the world. And when we were discussing this time last week, I think we were looking at the sort of retaliatory blow that the Chinese were striking on their tariffs. I mean, the mood music from the US administration seems to be that the UK is perhaps not the front of the queue, to use somebody else's language, but not too far to the back of the queue in terms of being able to negotiate a trade deal with the US. But I think probably given the weight that President Trump has given to tariffs, and we can debate the wisdom, which is generally accepted that there is no wisdom in tariffs, and it's very bad for everybody ultimately. But I doubt he's going to abandon tariffs immediately or at any point soon on the basis that this is a fundamental part of his economic programme, and he believes it's essential for rebuilding manufacturing industrial base in the US. And so I suspect that the thing that the UK government will now focus on is, and that's why Rachel Reeves is travelling to the US at the moment, is getting a deal, finishing the negotiations, getting the deal in place. And then at that point, I suppose, you're then maybe in a better position to start to try to reduce tariffs. And I think for the UK government, one of the big prizes will be about what they can do about tariffs on steel, given obviously the extraordinary measures they took last weekend in relation to the Scunthorpe plant.
Jason, do you think that the stark reality is that at least the 10% baseline tariffs, aside from steel, are going to remain, and we just have to accept that in the UK?
I think that's a starting point for Labour, but it's impossible to second guess Donald Trump, isn't it, at present? I mean, he's the most capricious and unpredictable president any of us have ever known. And at times he shifts position so abruptly that he startles even those who are working closely with him. I think the approach from Labour, it is as it is. It's pragmatic engagement. It's not seeking strategic autonomy. It's not the old Gaullist position. I mean, we are absolutely intertwined and dependent upon the United States for defence, intelligence, security, and to a lesser extent, trade. And, Starmer likes this idea of the UK as a kind of the bridge to the United States and to Europe, much more convincing metaphor when we were in the European Union. When we were at the top table of negotiations there, as we no longer are. But that's their pragmatic position, and that won't change, and they will keep negotiating and get the best deal that they can. But yes, the baseline is 10% at present.
I'm just wondering, Nicky, if now is the time, if we're going to have to accept that, for a start, on the front page of the Eye today is suggesting that there's huge pressure, for example, on food standards. In order to get a free trade deal with America, then we might have to just accept, chlorinated chicken and all these things that before people have been very unhappy with. We're going to have to make concessions to get a deal. Of course, that's the very nature of a deal. Is it worth doing that, or actually should we just be turning our heads and saying, OK, Europe, China, whoever it may be, India, is that where we should be focusing? Or is it so important that we have this trade deal with the US?
I mean, I think politically it is important, but and for the government, whoever it was in power here, you're absolutely right, Chloe, which is they have to make a decision about the trade-offs that are necessary. We're talking about, I mean, the issue of food standards, obviously, in terms of a deal with the US, has come back. But, one of the other things that many of us are concerned about was the issue about online safety standards, for example. And of course, each side, particularly the US, will be throwing everything they've got. All their asks will be part of the negotiations. And, they'll have, it sounds like the tech companies are saying, well, don't compromise on, well, this is your opportunity to try to get the UK to lift some of their online safety restrictions. And of course, US farmers will be talking about food standards and everything else. Look, I think the point is, so politically, yes, they need a deal with the US, but the UK trade negotiators are frantically negotiating with many, many countries. We've had ministers visiting China recently. I know that the negotiations with India are pretty well advanced, but with all these trade deals, it can make economic sense to negotiate a deal. But if it doesn't, for the leadership of the country, make political sense, or they want to negotiate a deal with another country first, it could be that the UK-US deal is pretty well ready to go, but it suits President Trump and the White House to actually agree a deal with another country first. So there's talk about Australia also being, in advanced negotiations with the US. So I think the UK government has to, and they've got enough trade negotiators and ministers that, have to have attention on many different areas of the world. They've got to have multilateral negotiations going on with many different countries all at the same time.
Jason, what do you think about what the concession should be for a trade deal? I mean, does it fill you with horror, the idea that maybe food standards would be cut or there'd be concessions to the big tech firms? Or do you think that actually, in the bigger picture, is worth it to get a trade deal, even if it's not bringing tariffs down, but to get a trade deal?
No, I don't think it's worth compromising fundamental standards to get a deal at any cost, at all cost. I think that would be craven and a mistake, a fundamental mistake. Particularly if the tech giants already they're so dominant that they operate in many ways as publishers do, as the Times does. But at the same time, they're not legally responsible for what's nominally published on their platform. And they are hugely powerful. We've not found a way to successfully regulate the tech platforms. I was encouraged by the online safety standards that are being introduced. We're all familiar with some of the terrible cases of the suffering of particular families who have lost children because of the horrifying environment that they found online. And we have to hold the line, I think. I mean, we don't have to be craven and succumb. We don't have to agree to everything that the Americans want or what Donald Trump wants. We're a robust, proud nation. We're the sixth largest economy in the world. We have considerable soft power. We have considerable influence. The English language is the dominant language in the world. We should stand up to the American demands and negotiate as hard as we can. But it's not a deal at any cost.
When we're talking about negotiating as hard as we can, Nikki, you'll be well aware that President Trump overnight suggested that a state visit to the UK is on for September. I mean, the government hasn't said that. Buckingham Palace hasn't said that. And we spoke to Ryan Saby, who's deputy political editor at The Sun, earlier on, and he was saying if you actually zoom in on the letter that was given in the Oval Office, the suggestion was come over in September for basically a meeting to chat about when the state visit would be. So maybe it's that. But I'm just wondering if there is a full state visit in September for Trump. Are we just kind of giving him all of the cards? Is any kind of negotiating strategy there gone once he's got his state visit?
Well, I'm not sure that. I mean, the state visit is part of it. It's part of the overall sort of relationship setting, I think, with President Trump. I mean, you may be right, Chloe, which is that actually he's taken that letter. It's a bit like, isn't it, when you have various family members who arrive earlier than expected, and you thought when you said pop in for a cup of tea, you didn't expect them to turn up with a suitcase, and so it may be that he's coming a bit earlier than expected, and state visits. Well, I don't know how quickly they can be pulled together, but I suspect they take some time. And I hope that the Speaker of the House of Commons is prepared for what happened last time, which was sort of protest about President Trump couldn't speak in Westminster, and there'll be plenty of protests and everything else. On the other hand, perhaps the view of Keir Starmer is, look, this is going to be quite an ordeal. Perhaps it's better to get it over and done with. President Trump's achieved an awful lot in his almost 100 days in office. When I say achieved a lot, I don't necessarily mean it's all good, or any of it's good, but so far. So perhaps better to get it over and done with before he's had even more time in office in which to upset even more people around the world. So it's going to happen at some point. He clearly wants to visit the UK. And I see now that he's potentially visiting Italy as well. So I suspect there's going to end up being some sort of European grand tour at some point in the autumn.
Jason, do you think we need to hang on to that bargaining chip of the state visit for as long as possible, or do you think September would be okay?
I'm completely relaxed about the state visit. I've got no idea about what's going on in negotiations. I very much enjoyed that moment of theatre in the Oval Office when Starmer sort of pulled the envelope out of his jacket pocket and gave it to Trump. You could see how tense Starmer was at that moment, and how Trump might react to it. And, I think he opened the letter and read it and started to talk lyrically about the King's signature, if I recall. Well, there's actually more seriously, there was an interesting interview this week with J.D. Vance with the online magazine Unheard, in which he spoke a lot about perceptions of the UK, Trump's love for the royal family, Trump's respect for our great islands, and so on. There's no doubt there's a fondness for the UK. It's all part of the process of trying to flatter Trump, I think, to indulge him, to indulge his vanity, his ego. But also Trump in Britain will also give others an opportunity, I presume, to direct their attention on him and his erratic presidency. And no doubt, I presume there will be protests. And for journalists such as myself, it will be a moment of high drama, of theatre. And when it happens, it will happen.
I'd just go back to Nikki's analogy of Trump as a sort of unexpected house guest turning up with their suitcase. I've got a really good friend from Florida, and I think that Trump would know this, being as he spends a lot of time in Florida, is the rule of the pineapple. And so when you arrive at somebody's house in Florida and you're staying in their guest room, they put a pineapple in the room. And when the pineapple is gone, it's time for you to leave.
Do that'll work in Buckingham Palace?
I mean, I'm sure they've got access to many, many pineapples, but yeah, I would recommend that as a rule for the royal family. When you've had enough, just take his pineapple away.
Gosh.